If you'd like to open your Bible to Mark chapter 8. Mark chapter 8. Thankful for things many people did to make sure we could be here today. I heard a rumor that Brent Lowe cleared our parking lot. He probably wouldn't want me to tell you that, but that's what I heard at least. I saw Chuck putting down some de-icer on the steps as I came up this morning. I know Kyle came up here and scouted out the place one day last week to make sure everything was okay, and I sat at home trapped by snow. So my wife tried to get out on Wednesday, got to the top of our hill, and then came right on back down. And so we stayed home for a couple days, and I found myself, as we're thinking about the disciples and decisions and all that stuff today, found myself questioning a decision I made a couple years ago. I don't decide things well. I don't like change. And when there's a big decision, it takes me forever to make the big decision. You never want to go shoe shopping with me. I will go and I will walk around, jump around, all the things you did when you were a kid, run down the aisle. I have feet that are short and fat. There's a pattern of some kind going on. I have feet that are short and wide, and so I will go in the shoe store trying to find the short, wide shoe, which is hard to find. And when I find one I like, I stick with it. I have a pair of dress shoes that I have been wearing to the office since my days in Oregon. I found one I really liked, and when that shoe wears out, I order another one on Amazon in exactly the same size and everything, and I get it in and start all over. And you probably think, he's been wearing the same shoes for like 6 years. No, different pair every year going on. 3 years ago now, I was at the car dealership, and the salesman says to me, "Do you think you want four-wheel drive?" And I said, "Nah, I think I'm good without that. I'll save some money." And I have regretted that decision so many times, especially over the last week. So for those of you guys who have it and have been carting people around, thank you. For those of you guys who got to the building and made sure it was ready for us, thank you for that. In Mark 8, we're going to look at something that is what a lot of commentators will call the fulcrum, the turning point, the point where everything kind of hinges in the Gospel of Mark. And it is something we're real familiar with, the confession of Peter. In Mark's gospel, we find it right here in the middle of the story, which is something New Testament writers like to do sometimes. Sometimes they'll put an important thing at the beginning or at the end, but a lot of times they'll just put it right there in the middle. And then other times they will repeat something again and again. And we've talked about a few of those over the last few weeks, and we'll hit another one today here in a little bit. But as we look at the confession of Peter, we're going to notice a couple things about the people in Mark and what they've done to this point in the story. First of all, maybe. Are we on the screen back there? There we go. First of all, in Mark, so far we have seen faith, when it's talked about by Jesus, has been shown by outsiders. And so we see the unclean woman that approaches Jesus, and Jesus is amazed by her faith. The Syrophoenician woman that comes to Jesus, and they have the whole discussion about the dogs eating the crumbs of the table and all of that. Her faith amazes him too. And then we have a deaf Gentile who also has trouble speaking, and the faith of this person amazes Jesus. Which, if you were a religious person at this point in time writing the story, this is not how it would go. You would talk about how faithful all the religious people were. You would talk about how all these people who have been followers of God that are now learning about the Messiah, their faith has been something that's incredible. And instead, what you found in the Gospel of Mark so far is kind of the opposite of that. It's the people you wouldn't look to as being a religious example, as being really faithful people, and the people who are religious don't quite seem to get it yet. The other thing we see to this point, I am on both sides. I have no lights, though. I wonder if my batteries are dead. Okay. The identity of Jesus has not been confessed by people yet at this point. It's been confessed by Mark as the writer, so I know Mark is people, but Mark is not a person in the story. Mark is kind of the narrator of the story. It's also been confessed by God. Thank you, Jared. Everybody on camera gets bonus Jared time this morning. It's been confessed by God. God says who Jesus is right back at the beginning of the story. And then of all beings that you wouldn't expect, again, if you're writing the story, who would know the identity of Jesus at this point in the story? Demons. Demons are not what you would want to call the hero of the story by any means, but they know who Jesus is. They've been around through a lot of time and seen what Jesus is and what he can do, and they recognize him when he's there. And so everybody who is recognizing the identity of Jesus to this point, they're not the people. It's everybody else. If you go on to the next one. Here we go. In Mark 8, we'll start in verse 27. It says that Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" So he begins with a question. And the things we will notice about this question here are, first of all, it is a who question, not a what question. He asks this question of, who do people think that I am? And secondly, he doesn't ask the disciples, who do you think? At least not yet. Thank you, Jared. He doesn't ask that, at least not yet. He asks them, who do people say that I am? Now, it's interesting to me that as he's asking about who these, go ahead. As he's asking about who these people think he is, if you've been here on Wednesday nights with me, I will do this from time to time when I'm trying to get you to talk on a Wednesday night, because I like when you talk more than when I talk. And I will ask you about something within it and what you think, and then I'll say, well, wait a minute, what do other people do here? Because we may not want to just get on gut level yet and admit what it is that we're doing, but what do other people say about this? What do they say? And so he begins with this question of, what do others say that I am? Now, one other thing I want you to make note of, we'll go backwards here for a second. This phrase, on the way. Jesus talks about this as he is on the way. John comes way back in the beginning of the gospel to prepare the way. And the way is going to become another of those common themes that we'll see throughout the gospel. We have talked about how Mark uses immediately a lot. We have seen things that he does when it comes to evangelism. And here we see this idea of the way. Now, between where we're at here in chapter 8 and chapter 12, the way is going to be mentioned 9 times, which over the course of a short number of chapters, that's a couple times a chapter basically, should cause us to focus in on what is he saying here. Now, very sneakily at the beginning of this whole series, as I was trying to pick what the background would look like as we went through this, you will notice it's a road. This is why. Because so much of what Jesus does in the book of Mark happens on the way. It's something where he's intending to go to one place and do one thing, and he gets interrupted along the way and instead does something else. And then in the case here of chapters 8 through 12, he is now on the way to where he is headed for his goal in this ministry. He is on the way to do his job as the Messiah, as the sacrifice. And other gospel writers will talk about him being on the way to Jerusalem or the way up to Jerusalem. But here in Mark, he is just on the way. It's what he has come to do. It is the journey that he is on. And his journey as being the Messiah, his way, is not the way other people would define it. It is a way that involves humiliation and rejection and suffering and death, and all of that is done through obedience. What would you do if you knew the way to somewhere was that dangerous and that unsure? We were having to make a trip to northern Oklahoma yesterday, and I found myself over the last couple days on all those websites now that they have, where you can see the condition of roads, and what you're hoping to see is lots of green lines where everything is okay. I was really glad to see as we went along the way that there was a lot of snow on the sides of the road, but very little on the road. They'd cleared all those roads really well. Till I got to Tulsa, where they had also cleared things really well, but I find that I struggle navigating Tulsa, and there are many turns I have to make to stay on the same highway, which just seems completely wrong. It should just be a straight line. But as I'm trying to make my way through Tulsa, luckily my wife was navigating with her GPS, and we made it through fine the first time. On the way back, she was not. I was using the thing in the car, and I took an exit thinking I was taking a veer off to the right because it was telling me to stay right, so I did. And next thing I know, I'm on a side street, and I stayed right back onto the highway, and I was fine again. If you knew the way was going to be complicated and dangerous, would you still choose it? And I like what Jesus does here in Mark 8, because it's not all of the good stuff. There is a lot of good stuff that comes with following Jesus. There is clearly salvation, relationship with God, the church, all of these great things that come along with that. But Jesus is very cut and dry with them here in Mark 8, and lets them know it's not all going to be good. So back to where we were in chapter 8 and verse 28. Said that they told him to this question of, who do people say that I am? Some say John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and others one of the prophets. So if this is the question for them, who do people say that Jesus is, then our question today is, who do people say that Jesus is here in 2021? In 2021, who do you hear people who do not believe, people who are not followers of Jesus, how do they describe him? And we talked about this idea a couple weeks ago, that people will talk about he's a good teacher and a prophet and maybe a good example. And C.S. Lewis had this trilemma that we talked about where he's not all of those things only. It's got to be more than that. He's got to be Lord. He's either who he's saying he is or he's a liar. He is a lunatic or liar or Lord, is the way C.S. Lewis put it. It's got to be one of those. You can't have it all. And so he asked this question of who do they say I am? And all of them come with good options. John the Baptist or Elijah or a prophet, those are all good things, but that's not enough. When the world around us says good teacher, prophet, someone who could be a good example, has some things that we could do in our lives to make our lives better, that's all fine, but it's not enough. So he brings the question a little further. He asked them, but who do you say that I am? We'll get to his answer here in a second. They've been wrestling with this question all along, I believe. Now, I really think they believe him to be the Messiah, but they're confused by what that looks like in front of them. All the way back, when the disciples are chosen, now this doesn't happen in Mark's gospel, but in John's. In John 1, and in verse 40, it says, one of the two who heard John speak and followed Jesus was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. We hear almost nothing about Andrew in the Gospels, but here we hear something very significant. He first found his own brother Simon and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which means the Christ. This great confession that Peter's about to make, his brother figured this out at the beginning. This is the Messiah that we're looking at. And then back in chapter 4, we looked at the story a few weeks ago where he's stilling the storm. It says they were filled with great fear and said to one another, who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him? They have been struggling with this question of who is Jesus. Now, I believe they knew who he was, but he frequently was not what they expected. And this is human nature, isn't it? How often are we struggling with people when we think one thing of them and they do something that we find to be out of character, or at least the character we have assumed of them? And so now we're not quite sure what to think anymore. What would you think if you were to look at me, the physical specimen before you, and we all went down to, I think the Chickasaw Wellness Center has a gym, I've heard, I've not been in there yet, but we all went down to the gym down there, and we decided to play a pickup basketball game. And Alan Simpson picked me first for his team because he's wise. And we went out there to play, and I got the ball on a breakaway, and I went up and did a reverse dunk right there in front of you. Man, this would be glorious. I hope somebody gets it on video. What would you think if that happened? You would think to yourself, I never would have imagined that would happen. I know that seems crazy and odd and impossible, and I will tell you that every day the apostles woke up, they had that kind of experience, where the thing they thought a Messiah would be, the thing they thought a Lord and a King would be, is entirely different than what they see happen in front of them. You've got a zealot in the group that thinks this guy's going to come lead political upheaval, and we're going to get rid of Rome, and the Jews are going to get back to the top of things, and this is what the Messiah has come to do. You've got that guy who's the treasurer in the group that thinks maybe this is a money-making proposition of some kind. You've got people within there that have been turned down by other rabbis because here they're out fishing and doing all what they're doing, and now Jesus has come along and they follow him, and they think our rabbi is going to end up being the best over all those that turned us down. All of the things they thought a Messiah would mean, what Jesus did was something different. And so as shocking as that out of character for me or for you may be, they were shocked like that almost every day, as Jesus did things they just couldn't explain. So even though they knew who he is, they just can't figure out why doesn't it look like what we think it should look like. And so Peter said, when he asked him, who do you say that I am? Peter answered, you are the Christ. Peter is the first human in the Gospel of Mark to proclaim this. You've had demons, you've had God, you've had the writer of Mark say it, but all of the people within the story, if they've thought it, no one has said it out loud. And so Peter makes this great confession. I know who they say you are, and all of that seems good, but I'm telling you, you are the Christ. And the Christ could mean a lot of different things in the Greek. It's the Messiah, as we see it so often, the chosen one. This is the one who is going to come, who is going to change everything. Everyone who encounters Jesus has to decide who he is. We've mentioned a few times over the last month or so, you cannot stay neutral when encountering Jesus. People will refuse him or people will follow him, but there's really just not an in-between. Because if you choose the in-between, you're not choosing anything that Jesus offers as a choice. And he strictly charged them to tell no one about him. And then he began to teach, verse 31. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. his being the Messiah is characterized by suffering on earth, not by victory. Now, when we turn to the end of the story in Revelation, we understand there's victory. There's victory like no one has ever seen before, but not the victory they're looking for. They're looking for a victory now. And there's so much like us in that way. We want things to be right now. We want everything to be good now. We don't want to wait. We don't want to be patient. And oftentimes when we do that, we find ourselves in a worse situation than where we started. And yet what he is offering them is not victory right in front of them. It's a victory that is coming in eternity. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I love Peter in so many ways. I love the fact that he is the guy who jumps out of the boat. I love the fact that he says dumb things before he thinks, because that's another thing that characterizes me quite a bit. I like the fact that he's willing to jump in and make something happen. But of all the things I want Peter to do right after this great confession, I don't think this is it. When we think about rebuking in Scripture, it's that thing we're encouraged to do when we see a brother or sister that's going off in the wrong way and we want to try to help bring them back. It's that thing we need sometimes when we're going off the wrong way, and yet Peter here rebukes. So I want you to think too about where we've seen rebuking happen in Mark to this point. Rebuking happens when Jesus casts out a demon, and he rebukes that demon. Rebuking happens when he rebukes the winds and the waves in the stilling of the storm. Rebuking will happen with another demon in Mark. Rebuking will happen at one point when people bring the little children to Jesus, and the disciples, they rebuke those people bringing the children. Look at all the times that rebuking happens, and the one person I don't think you want to rebuke in the story of Mark is Jesus. And there is a strength to that word. It is I see what you're doing is completely off base, and I need to correct you now. Can you imagine the guts it would take to do that with the one that you have just proclaimed is the Messiah, is the Christ, is the chosen one? The one that has been proclaimed to you as the Lamb of God, the Son of God. And now you're pulling him aside and saying, you know what? I appreciate you're the Messiah, but you're just way off on this. This is not how this is supposed. Let me explain to you what a Messiah should look like. And as comical as that sounds, that is completely what Peter is feeling on the inside. Now, I hope we wouldn't do that to Jesus, but I feel like there's sometimes with God, when things are not going the way we want them to go, that we are almost pulling God aside and saying, well, hang on, God, I'm loyal to you. I'm faithful. I follow. I go to church every week. I used to put money in a plate when we had one of those. Now I do it online, or I mail it in or something. I'm as invested as we're allowed to be right now. I'm all about you. And my life should be going a lot more smoothly than it is right now. We do that, don't we? Maybe it's not even for us. Maybe it's not personal, so we feel it's more selfless. It's somebody else is struggling. And we should say to God, that shouldn't be like this. And yet Jesus, being the Messiah, is not characterized by the things that we would make it be. It's something entirely different. So Peter pulls him aside to rebuke. For Peter, the indication that the Son of Man will die is unthinkable. For Jesus, it is inevitable. This has always been what was going to happen in the mind of Jesus. He knew it would lead to this. And as they are trying to adjust on the fly to what is going on, this was his plan all along. Now, if nothing else, I hope this morning we can take comfort in the fact that all of these things that throw us off track are all things God understands completely. They are not things that are surprises to God. This was always within his plan. Ideas that don't match our presuppositions are often the most difficult ones to accept. I don't like change. And when things change a little bit, it takes me a while to catch up. I don't like things to not be exactly as I have them mapped out. And yet so much of the life the apostles are living right now is just not what they thought it was going to be. But turning and seeing his disciples, verse 33, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." There are two choices here. There is the way of God, or there is the way of Satan. Notice there have been a lot of either this or this in the last few chapters here of Mark. It's either one or the other. This is not what our world likes. Our world likes a big array of choices. And here, if you are not with me, You are against me. And so when I read those words, I try to imagine how they would feel to Peter, because they seem really harsh to me. Anytime Jesus speaks and it's really harsh, I kind of step back for a second, and I think, what is he saying here? And for Peter, there has to be a moment of, do you remember just a moment ago when I was making the good confession and you were going to build your church on this rock and all that stuff from one of the other Gospels? And now here, get behind me, Satan? Do we really have to go that far? But this is exactly what it is, isn't it? Think of the last time that Jesus says the idea of get away, Satan, or be gone, Satan. In Matthew 4, the story of the temptation. Matthew 4, beginning in verse 8, it says, "Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, 'All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me.' Then Jesus said to him, 'Be gone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve.'" Satan was suggesting the view of the Messiah that the disciples and others have, and the view of the Christian life that sometimes we have, which is, if you will just give in to me in my way, then everything is going to be great. And Jesus' answer to that, to Satan and to Peter, is, "Be gone, Satan. This is not the way that God has planned." What if we could readjust a little bit what it is to be followers of Christ, and to understand that sometimes the way of Jesus is the way of Jesus as we've seen it described here. It's suffering and difficulty, but still obedience through all of that. Could we do a little better in our following of Jesus? And calling the crowd to him, verse 34, with his disciples, he said to them, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." Taking up your cross is not just suffering. That's kind of the way we use that term nowadays. It's not just suffering. Everyone suffers. It is suffering because you're following Jesus. It is difficulty in life because you're following Jesus. Has following Jesus brought us challenges somewhere along the way? And I would imagine for most of us who have done it for very long, the answer is yes. It will not bring suffering, most likely for most of us, the way it brought it to Jesus. But there will be times in life that life is a little more difficult because we follow. And taking up our cross is not, man, life sure is hard. But is life hard because I follow Jesus? For the audience that he's speaking to, it's going to be. These guys are going to follow through persecution. They're going to follow to death. And yet they're still going to follow. For whoever would save his life would lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. What are we willing to give up? Is there anything that you could not imagine living life without? Would you be willing to give it up for Jesus if it called for that? We get so many things that we grow accustomed to having. So many people in our part of the country have really struggled over the last week with water and power, being able to get out of your house, being able to get things. We had, at the beginning of all this corona stuff, you can remember going to the store and finding the empty toilet paper aisle way back when. Something that happens in the South, I don't know if it's quite as bad here in Oklahoma, but in Arkansas and Alabama, you would go during a snowstorm to the store, and it was milk and bread was gone. I have friends that always joke when the snowstorms come around, is everybody enjoying your milk sandwiches today? Milk and bread. This past week, I saw somebody took a picture of the soda aisle in a grocery store, and it was completely empty, except for that weird new coffee and Coke blend. Just nothing on the shelves all the way down. People have had to learn to do without. We in our tub at the house right now have two 18-gallon tubs inside our tub filled with water. So we could leave the water trickling because we didn't want the line to freeze, but still have water to flush just in case. What if we lose water and power and all of those things? And I will tell you that whatever you have to do without is nothing compared to Jesus. Even if it's water, even if it's power, even if it's wealth, even if it's an easy life, we can give up a lot of things for Jesus. And so Jesus' message to his apostles and to us here in Mark 8 is, if you really want to follow, if you really mean this, you're going to have to give something up to do it. Faith and discipleship, this is James Edwards in the Pillar New Testament commentary. Faith and discipleship cannot be rendered from the sidelines, removed from risk. There's always going to be a little bit of risk involved in following. There are always going to be people who think differently of you in a bad way. There are always going to be situations you get into that are going to be a little more difficult because you follow. And sometimes in the difficulties of life, when so many people just want to get angry and upset, we are to react differently than that. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? There is nothing in this world that is worth choosing over Jesus. Whatever that thing is that you think, man, life would be so much better if just this happened, or if I just had this, none of it is worth it over Jesus. We have to go all in. We can't just kind of be committed. We can't just partially move into our relationship with Jesus. We have to be people who, every bit of us, all of our being, is with him. And that's why I think so many of these commentators were correct when they look at Mark 8 as the turning point of everything. Because it's not just the turning point of the Gospel of Mark and the story of Jesus and that great confession that begins to change everything about how they view what a Messiah is. It's a turning point for you and me too. Because if you are still neutral on Jesus, this chapter makes it very clear to us that's just not an option. For Peter, it's a moment of confession followed by a moment of, but I really want it this way. And Jesus says you can't do that. And for each of us, as we choose to follow, it is fully following, regardless of what life brings our way, regardless of how easy or difficult it may be, we are fully following him. And the blessing of that is there is victory. It's not the political victory that they were looking for, but for us, there's a victory in eternity that we can live with him. And I think you will find also that so much of the life following him, as we follow him together, is really a pretty good life anyway. So this morning, if you look at your life and you feel like there's something lacking here, you're on the way, but you don't even know where you're on the way to, begin a life on the way to him this morning. Confess his name the way that Peter did, be baptized into him, and change your life today. Let today be your turning point. Or if today, if you have found yourself on the way and you're trying to navigate through Tulsa and you take an exit not even meaning to, and there you are, you can either keep going that way this morning or you can get back on the right road and you can head back towards him. Today, if we can help you in any way as your church family, following him for the first time or coming back to him and changing your life again, let it be your turning point today as we stand and sing.